Wet. We gardena in yardagum, feat kuninga primia frunan, hu fa epilingus elen fremedon.
So begins the opening scene of the epic poem Beowulf. Listen up, the narrator says as he gets ready to tell the story. Often we have heard the tales of our famous heroes and their victories on the battlefield. So the narrator is getting ready to tell yet another tale of a famous hero's victory and his defeat. Believe it or not, the language the narrator is speaking is English, at least English as it was over 1,000 years ago when Beowulf was written. So why do we still read a poem that's over 1,000 years old? That's an excellent question. To help answer it, we're going to take a quick look at the historical context that brought us this incredible piece of literature, some of the factors that contributed to the preservation of this Anglo-Saxon language, also known as Old English, and 5 specific reasons that we still read Beowulf, including some character traits and terms to keep in mind while you're reading. First, let's set the stage with some background history. For centuries, the Roman Empire had ruled much of the world, but by the start of the 5th century, the Roman Empire had lost much of its power. Years of civil wars, political chaos, and successful invasions by Germanic tribes like the Visigoths and Vandals forced the Romans to abandon lands that were once under their control. The Roman retreat from the island of Britannia allowed several nomadic tribes from Denmark and northern Germany, the Jutes, Saxons, and Angles, to claim this land as their new home. By the 8th century, the new Anglo-Saxon culture formed by these tribes so dominated the island that it became known as Angleland, which would later become England. When the first Anglo-Saxons migrated to Britannia, they brought with them their religious beliefs in Norse mythology, worshipping the gods Thor, Odin, and Freya, among others. Evidence of these religious beliefs can still be found in the English names for the first 6 days of the week, which are all named after gods of Norse mythology. But the Nordic influence didn't outlast the lingering Roman influence. The religion of the Roman Empire was Christianity, and due to the efforts of St. Patrick and other Christian missionaries, the Celts, who controlled nearby Ireland and parts of Scotland, were predominantly Christian. As Anglo-Saxon culture spread across the island, marriage between the pagan immigrants and the Christian Celts became common. This intermingling, combined with the missionary work of St. Augustine of Canterbury, resulted in the rapid spread of Christianity among the Anglo-Saxons. By the end of the 8th century, almost the entire island of Britannia was decidedly Christian. So why did the Anglo-Saxon language survive to become the English language that we know? After all, Germanic tribes like the Angles and the Saxons had always relied on oral tradition to pass along their stories. Scops, or tribal poets, created eloquent songs or poems to commemorate important battles or other events. These songs or poems would be performed and passed down from generation to generation. This meant that the Scop held a very important place within Germanic tribal society. He was not only the main source of entertainment for the tribe, but also the musician, the teacher, the historian, and the cultural curator. But since the tales and histories of the Scop were spoken or sung and never written down, these stories could be lost or forgotten. And this is exactly what happened to many ancient cultures that were once vibrant and flourishing. We know nothing of their languages today, and the stories and histories we have of them are recorded by other cultures. So what made the Anglo-Saxon language different? Well, we've mentioned that the Anglo-Saxons adopted the religion of the Romans. They were influenced by other aspects of Roman culture as well, including the value that the Romans placed on writing. Like the Greeks before them, the Romans were proud of their accomplishments and their culture. Men who could record their histories and their stories were held in high esteem. The works of Roman writers Ovid, Horace, Cicero, and Virgil are widely read even today. If not for this Roman influence, the Anglo-Saxon language would likely not have survived. There isn't, of course, one single person who can be credited with the survival and preservation of the English language, but there are individuals who stand out in history as playing a major role. One of these is Alfred the Great, the first king of the Anglo-Saxons. Alfred gained fame for defeating a Viking invasion in 878, and he remained king until his death in 899. During his reign, Alfred promoted education by requiring literacy of all men who held positions of authority, by establishing a court school where lessons were taught in English, and by writing and translating works into English himself. Partly due to his influence and the value that he placed on education and writing in the common language, we have over 400 surviving manuscripts written in Anglo-Saxon, or Old English as we call it. One of these manuscripts, called the Noel Codex, contains the earliest example of English poetry. That poem is Beowulf. So again, why do we read a poem that's over 1,000 years old? Well, besides the fact that it's a really good story, there are other reasons. For now, we'll focus on 5 of them. Number 1, Beowulf is the oldest epic poem written in English. It was written down, probably by monks, sometime between the 8th and 11th century. The fact that this is one of the earliest pieces of English literature is all by itself a really good reason to read it. Number 2, Beowulf is the first epic hero in English literature, even though the character Beowulf isn't English himself. Beowulf is special. He's a literary icon. He also happens to be the first dragon slayer in English literature. Number 3, the poem Beowulf employs many of the literary devices that writers still use today. It contains some of the earliest English language examples of metaphor, irony, foreshadowing, understatement, alliteration, and more. Number 4, Beowulf gives us a glimpse into Anglo-Saxon society in the Middle Ages. Beowulf is written in the common language of the Anglo-Saxon people. Although it was written in England, the story is set in Denmark and Sweden. Since the early Angles and Saxons passed stories down orally, as we saw earlier, the story is likely a great deal older than the period in which it was written down. It gives us insight into the structure of society and everyday life, probably giving us a glimpse of a far older culture than even the written poem itself. And number 5, Beowulf establishes the hero's code of values. In this epic poem, we can see many of the characteristics considered heroic in the Anglo-Saxon period, and we see many of these same values reflected in epic heroes down through literary history, and even today. Following are 10 terms and character traits that apply to this code of values, and particularly to Beowulf. Keep them in mind as you're reading through the excerpts from the poem. Physical strength. In a place and time where living conditions are quite primitive compared to the modern world, physical strength is especially valued. A hero has great strength or abilities that seem almost godlike in many cases. Oratory skill. This means that the hero has the ability to speak eloquently. Comitatus. This term refers to the bond of loyalty between Germanic rulers and their warriors. The warriors, or thanes in the Anglo-Saxon story, honor, respect, serve, and defend their ruler to the death. He, in turn, provides them with protection and a share of his wealth. It's a relationship of camaraderie and brotherhood with a strong emphasis on loyalty and kinship. This is the step in English social structure that came before the medieval system of feudalism and the class system that dominated the social structure for centuries. Weird. This word means fate and is an indication of the belief that forces outside of his control determine the course of a man's life. This notion that a hero's life is guided by fate or destiny is a recurring one in Beowulf and in the stories of epic heroes throughout English literature, as well as in other cultures. Our modern word weird comes from this word. Confidence. The hero is self-assured of his ability to win if fate so decrees it. Justice or vengeance. Heroes seek justice and, in the Anglo-Saxon culture, believe in vengeance as a form of it, which leads us to the idea of a weregild. This is a term that refers to making a payment for taking someone's life. If you killed someone, you could pay a weregild to make restitution for the death. This idea emphasizes fairness and taking ownership for one's actions. In a social structure with a strong belief in vengeance as a form of justice, it also provides a means to put a stop to revenge killings that can go back and forth and on for generations. Pursuit of glory. For a hero, there is no compromise with fear. A warrior doesn't back down or turn away from danger, and he doesn't allow evil to go unchallenged. He will do what is right, brave, and heroic, regardless of the danger to himself, even if it costs him his life. And because of this, he is looked up to by others as almost godlike. This is the glory that the hero seeks. When you're considering this, also remember that the story of Beowulf was written down about 1,200 years ago, but it's told about a time even earlier, when, as we saw before, stories and events were passed down by word of mouth. If someone was going to be remembered, he would need to do something worth telling stories about, something that would bring glory enough that he would be remembered for generations to come. Lineage. This term refers to a person's family line, his ancestors and descendants. A hero fights and gains glory not only for himself, but for those who went before him and for those who will come after. He is bringing honor to his family name. In the poem Beowulf, lineage is important. Beowulf is descended from a brave warrior, while the monster Grendel is of a fatherless race and referred to as a descendant of Cain, a kin-killer, the son of Adam and Eve who kills his own brother in the biblical account. This contrast underscores how important the idea of lineage and family loyalty is to the Anglo-Saxons. Respect for enemies. The hero faces his enemy with the acknowledgement that the enemy goes into battle with courage also. The hero respects the enemy's strength and abilities and acknowledges that fate will choose between the two opponents. May the best man win.